Before there was a detail, before there was a wiretap, before McNulty ever walked into a courtroom and complained to a judge, there was just a city and a game that had been running in that city long before any of these characters were born. Baltimore. Not the Baltimore of tourist brochures in the inner harbor, but the Baltimore of the low rises and the high rises, the docks, the row houses, the corners. Over 5 seasons, David Simon and Ed Burns built something that wasn't really a crime show. It was an autopsy of an American city, told through its drug trade, its police department, its unions, its schools, its newspapers, and its politics. Today, we're tracing the whole thing in order, from the origins of the Barksdale organization to the final shot of the final season, the ins and the outs of it. This is the complete history of Baltimore, as The Wire tells it. And real quick, if you're into deep dives like this, hit subscribe. It takes 1 second and it genuinely helps the channel. Alright, let's start at the beginning. Before The Wire ever goes up, long before season 1, in the towers and the row houses of West Baltimore, 2 boys grow up together, Avon Barksdale and Stringer Bell. The show only gives us this in fragments, old friends finishing each other's sentences, a shared history heavy enough that neither of them ever has to explain it. What we can piece together is that Avon and Stringer came up on the same corners, played on the same basketball court, and eventually built something out of nothing. The Barksdale organization. By the time the show picks up, they control the towers of Franklin Terrace and the low-rise courtyards around Fayette Street, a vertically integrated business moving product through a chain of command that would make a business school professor nod in approval. Avon is the muscle and the myth, a former boxer, a man who believes in the neighborhood the way a king believes in his kingdom. Stringer is the brain, a man reading economics textbooks and taking business classes at the community college between murders, trying to run a drug corporation like it's a Fortune 500 company. Under them, a chain of lieutenants and soldiers. Avon's nephew, D'Angelo Barksdale, young, thoughtful, and quietly unsuited for the life he was born into. Enforcers like Weebay Bryce, a soldier who kills without hesitation and strangely loves tropical fish. Stinkum, Bird, and a rotating cast of corner boys and lookouts, kids who grew up with no other economy available to them. This is the machine the show drops us into. Not the beginning of the drug trade in Baltimore, but simply the version of it running when the cameras start rolling. The story properly begins when a low-level Barksdale soldier walks on a murder charge in a West Baltimore courtroom, and Detective Jimmy McNulty, watching from the gallery, can't help himself. He goes to the judge afterward and essentially tattles on his own department, pointing out that nobody is even investigating the Barksdale organization, despite a trail of bodies connected to them. This single act of insubordination is the spark for everything that follows. It embarrasses the department into forming a detail, a scratch unit of detectives nobody particularly wants to investigate Avon Barksdale. Kema Greggs, sharp and underestimated. Bunk Moreland, McNulty's partner in conscience. Lester Freeman, buried for years doing furniture appraisals in the pawn shop unit, revealed to be the best detective in the building the moment anyone lets him work a real case. Roland Przybylewski, called Prez, a walking disaster with a gun, who turns out to have a genuine gift for code breaking. This detail starts small and grows the way real investigations grow, pager numbers leading to pay phones leading to a wiretap, the actual wire that gives the show its name. On the other side of the wire, we watch the corner from the inside. D'Angelo, demoted to running a low-rise pit after the Towers case, mentors 2 young corner boys, Bodie and Poot, and takes a slower, gentler kid named Wallace under his wing. Wallace is the show's first great tragedy. Sweet, smart with numbers, still basically a child, he gets scared after seeing something he shouldn't have, and considers cooperating with police. Stringer Bell, protecting the organization with the same cold calculation he'd apply to a bad quarterly report, sanctions the killing. Bodie and Poot, boys who looked up to Wallace, are the ones ordered to do it. It is one of the most devastating scenes in the entire series, and it sets the moral temperature for everything that follows. Nobody in this world is safe, least of all the children being used to run it. Season 1 ends with the wiretap finally producing enough evidence to take down much of the organization. Avon Barksdale is arrested and takes a plea deal for a relatively short sentence. D'Angelo, facing serious time, is talked out of cooperating by his own family and takes a plea as well, loyalty purchased with a lie about how much they'll take care of him inside. The detail is quietly disbanded, its detectives scattered back to punishment postings, because in Baltimore, solving the case is never actually the point. With Avon in prison, the story shifts, almost sideways, down to the Baltimore docks. Frank Sobotka, a union leader for the stevedores, watches his industry dying in real time, automation and outsourcing hollowing out the port and the jobs that built his community. To keep his union alive, to fund political lobbying that might save the docks, Frank starts smuggling for an organization known only as the Greek, moving containers that never quite make it through customs. His son Ziggy is reckless and desperate for approval, dragging the family further into the operation, and his nephew Nick gets pulled in, trying to build a life he can't afford honestly. It's a story about a dying institution and the people trying badly to keep it breathing. It ends in tragedy. Ziggy, humiliated once too often, kills a man in a fit of rage. Frank, trying to make a deal to protect his family, is murdered by the Greeks' people, his body dumped in the harbor he spent his life working. Meanwhile, back in West Baltimore, Stringer Bell is running the Barksdale organization in Avon's absence and running it his way. He pushes the crews toward using cutouts and code, tries to professionalize the violence out of the business, and starts quietly diversifying into legitimate real estate development, laundering drug money into downtown property, deals with the same ruthlessness he once applied to the corners. And it's here that the two storylines finally touch. Investigators tracking the Greek smuggling operation and detectives circling back to Barksdale business start comparing notes, and D'Angelo, sitting in prison, becomes a serious liability. He's grown disillusioned with the life, with his uncle, with the lie he was told about being taken care of, and there are quiet signs he might finally talk. Stringer can't take that risk. D'Angelo is murdered in his cell, made to look like a suicide on Stringer's order. Avon's own nephew killed to protect a business Avon built. It's a betrayal that will detonate later, but for now it's simply buried, the same way the organization buries everything inconvenient. Avon comes home from prison wanting his old world back exactly as he left it. Corners, muscle, respect measured in territory. Stringer, having spent Avon's time away thinking like a businessman, wants something different, a quieter, more profitable arrangement. He proposes a co-op among the city's major dealers, pooling resources for a shared, high-quality product supply and, crucially, agreeing not to kill each other over turf, because bodies bring heat and heat is bad for business. It's a genuinely fascinating idea. A criminal cartel run like a chamber of commerce, and it works for exactly as long as it takes for someone to break the rules. That someone is Avon, who can't let go of the old logic of respect and territory, and who starts a shooting war over turf with a new, terrifying rival. Marlowe Stanfield. Young, near silent, utterly without sentiment, Marlowe is expanding into the towers with a coldness that makes Avon look almost nostalgic by comparison. The war between them escalates, drawing in an assassin for hire named Brother Mouzone and a freelance stick-up man named Omar Little, who has spent years robbing Barksdale stash houses purely on principle, and who has his own blood debt with Avon's crew. In the chaos, Stringer, desperate to end a war he never wanted, makes an unthinkable choice. He tips off Major Bunny Colvin to the location of one of Avon's stash houses, trading his own partner's business to police in order to protect his real estate ambitions from further violence. Avon, for his part, has finally learned the truth about who really ordered D'Angelo's death, and makes his own quiet, devastating move. He gives up Stringer's location to Brother Mouzone and Omar, sending them to collect a debt of their own. Stringer Bell, the brains of the organization, the man who read Adam Smith between murders, is shot dead in an empty building he was trying to redevelop, killed by the two men his own former partner sent after him. Avon is arrested again shortly after, this time for good, sentenced to a stretch long enough to end his career on the street entirely. Elsewhere that same year, Major Colvin runs his own quiet experiment, designating a few abandoned blocks as de facto legal zones for drug dealing, trying to draw the violence away from residential streets and get addicts real access to services. Hamsterdam, the corner boys call it. For a moment it actually works, crime drops, addicts get treatment, and then the political machine discovers it and ends Colvin's career in disgrace, because the city would rather have the problem than the appearance of surrendering to it. By the end of this chapter, the two men who founded the Barksdale organization are both gone, one dead, one entombed in a cell, and the corners they built are already being inherited by someone far colder than either of them. With the Barksdale name fading, the show widens its lens again, this time to the schools and to the kids growing up in the wreckage of everything we've watched so far. Randy, Michael, Namond, and Dookie, four boys navigating a school system as broken and outmatched as every other institution in this story. Namond is Weebay's son, expected by his mother to take up the family business, and it's Bunny Colvin, out of the department now and teaching, who quietly saves him from that fate. Randy, sweet and entrepreneurial, gets crushed by a system that treats a scared kid's cooperation with police as an unforgivable betrayal. Dookie, brilliant and utterly failed by every adult around him, slides slowly toward the same corners that raised everyone before him. And Michael, proud, guarded, protecting his little brother from an abusive situation at home, catches the attention of the man now running West Baltimore, Marlowe Stanfield. Marlowe's rise, while the show is busy with the kids, is total and brutal. His enforcers, the eerily calm Chris Partlow and the terrifyingly casual Snoop, don't just kill people who cross Marlowe, they make them disappear, stashing bodies inside vacant row houses across the neighborhood so that no murder ever shows up as a murder, and no case ever gets opened. It's one of the show's bleakest inventions, an entire hidden graveyard sitting behind boarded-up windows while the city's murder rate quietly, officially goes down. Bodie, one of the two boys who killed Wallace back in Season 1, has grown into the last true believer in the old Barksdale way, refusing to fall in line under Marlowe's new order. It costs him his life, gunned down on the same corner he'd worked his entire adolescence, a soldier loyal to an organization that no longer exists. and running underneath all of it, the political story. Councilman Tommy Carcetti, ambitious and not without genuine idealism, runs for mayor promising real change to a city machine that has survived every reformer who came before him, and wins, inheriting a police department, a school system, and a drug economy that are all, in their own ways, quietly rigged to resist actually being fixed. By the final chapter, the institutions closest to the truth start failing in their own particular ways. At the Baltimore Sun, budget cuts gut the newsroom, and a young reporter named Scott Templeton, hungry for a big story and unwilling to do the work of finding a real one, starts fabricating sources and quotes, and his editors, starved for a hit, don't look too closely. Meanwhile, McNulty, furious that the department has no resources left to properly investigate Marlo Stanfield's killings, does something almost unthinkable. He fabricates evidence of a serial killer targeting the city's homeless population, inventing a crisis dramatic enough to unlock funding and manpower. Also, he can quietly redirect a wiretap back onto Marlo's organization. It's the show's final, bitter joke that the only way to get the city to actually care about a real string of murders is to lie about a fake one. The wiretap works. Lester Freeman and the reconstituted detail finally build a case that reaches Marlo himself, and Chris Partlow and Snoop are eventually caught, their hidden graveyard of vacant houses discovered at last. Snoop doesn't make it that far, though. Omar Little, waging a one-man war against Marlo's organization for most of this final season, tracks her down and kills her in the street, one predator ending another. And then, in one of the most quietly brutal moments in the whole show, Omar himself, the man who survived years of gunfights and stick-ups and reputation alone, is shot dead in a corner store by a child barely old enough to understand what he's just done. Marlo Stanfield is finally arrested through the wiretap case McNulty built on a lie, but the machine that raised him proves it can absorb even him. A backroom deal lets him walk largely free in exchange for pleading out quietly, the case closed on paper long before anything resembling justice actually happens. McNulty's fabrication unravels, and rather than let the department be publicly humiliated, his own bosses quietly force him into retirement and bury the scandal, because in Baltimore the truth is never actually the goal. Containing embarrassment is. And so the recorded history of this Baltimore ends the way the show always told us it would, not with a resolution, but with a montage. Dookie, having tried and failed to escape the corners, is left shooting up in an alley, absorbed into the same addiction the show has been documenting since episode 1. Michael, hardened by everything he's survived, picks up a gun and starts robbing dealers, walking almost exactly in Omar's footsteps, a new stick-up boy for a new generation. Marlo, unable to let go of the streets even with his money and his freedom, is last seen out on a corner at night, drawn back to the only life that ever made him feel like anything. A new detective, Sidner, sets up a wiretap of his own on a new dealer, using the same methods, chasing the same ghosts, the whole apparatus resetting itself to run again. Carcetti's political machine continues turning, promises made and quietly abandoned, the next ambitious man already lining up behind him. The paper prints its next story. The corner grows its next crew of lookouts and runners, kids barely old enough to understand what they've just signed up for. Nothing has really changed, because nothing in this story was ever built to change. That's the whole argument the show spent 5 years making. It isn't a story about bad guys and good guys. It's a story about institutions, the police department, the docks, the schools, the newspaper, the political machine, all of them designed, quietly and structurally, to survive rather than to fix anything, generation after generation, corner after corner. Now, throughout all of this, I kept the story to what actually plays out on screen. But there's a whole other layer underneath everything you just heard, because almost none of this was invented from nothing. David Simon spent years as a police reporter for the Baltimore Sun, writing with real homicide detectives, and Ed Burns spent decades as a real Baltimore police officer and later a public school teacher, and huge pieces of what we just walked through are drawn directly from cases they lived through themselves, real stash houses, real wiretaps, real kids who inspired characters like Wallace and Randy and Namond, real politicians, and real newsroom battles. Some of it is barely fictionalized at all. That's a genuinely fascinating story on its own, where the line between the show and the real city actually sits, and that's exactly what the next video is going to be. So if you want to know how much of this was real, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Until then, all in the game.